growth and change are what make our lives, they keep them full of blood. It's what keeps us from the muscles of our wonder muscles from atrophying, you know, but you have to exercise them. I feel like I can't say that or write about that enough. Live in that space of whatever it is that gives you that feeling where you're levitating, that you feel a little like you're getting away with something, you know, that you're like, that gives you this blast of energy that you don't get anywhere else. Like, do that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's how you develop that hunger for perpetual growth and self-discovery and change. The very last chapter of my book is called An Appetite for Possible Things.
Ooh,
it's talking about this.
Welcome back to the transmission, my friends. Feeling really that the mystery is in the mundane. That is one of my favorite sensations. This is not a state that I'm in all the time, mind you. Far from it. But I have, as I'm sure many of you have, on occasion, been just struck, almost overwhelmed by the imminent, pulsating glory of reality just walking down the street. I mean, even just the other day, I was actually reading a paper on Neoplatonism, and I had a mini eruption of it. And related side note, it's kind of funny how from the outside looking in, you could just be looking at a computer screen and either be filled with dread about what you're doing or bursting with wonder on the inside, you know? World of difference. Yet only you would know. But anyway, of course, my mission is to move myself closer to the latter, closer to the wonder pulsing. And I know that is also one of the missions of my wonder brother, our guest in this one, Cory Allen. He's a longtime friend, multi-decade meditator and seeker. He's also the returningest guest to Third Eye Drops, by the way. And he's an author on that note. He's got a new book that is about to drop this month, Brave New You. This My Meld was a true tickler because we start by riffing on one of our biggest mutual philosophical influences, Robert Anton Wilson, and his sort of multimodal trickstery approach to seeking and reality bending. Seriously, if you haven't read the book Cosmic Trigger by Robert Anton Wilson, do yourself a favor. We also muse about how, in a kind of unintuitive sense, how meditation, contemplation, even altered states help you see reality, the truth of things more clearly, and how definitely, I think, all of the above, when done correctly, help guide you on that path of what Carl Jung would call individuation. You know, your own personal path of, I can't think of anything less trite than destiny, but I do think it fits, my friends. All the links that you're going to need for Cory Allen, his new book, his pod, are in the description. Same for Third Eye Drops. On that note, do presently gooch that algorithm with a like, a sub, a comment, a share. Gooch is not a verb, but it is now. We've also got a back catalog of hundreds of audio-only pods, including many with Cory Allen. So do subscribe to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you would like to go deeper, my friends, enter our Wonder Lodge, riff with me and hundreds of other like-minded Wonder Dippers, join a patron-only Discord, monthly Zoom hangs, a book club, get rewards, then head over to patreon.com/Third Eye Drops. I would love to riff with you there. But for now, let's meld minds with Cory Allen. Welcome back to the conversational Chapel Perilous.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. I'm happy to be in the chapel. I'm happy to be feeling perilous today.
Ooh.
So that I can deliver the plurality that we're looking for.
As you and I know, and probably a lot of people listening at this point probably know, that's a sort of subtle jab toward one of our mutual early inspos, Robert Anton Wilson. And I thought it would be fun to revisit him with you because that was definitely one of the things that you and I first when we became friends, like an embarrassing number of years ago at this point. I remember that being a very central topic of bonding, is just Robert Anton Wilson's mercurial, mystical agnosticism, but a kind of agnosticism that's not like a shoulder shrug and we'll never know, but we'll never know, but we should explore. We should have as many experiences as possible. We should attempt to meta program our psyche and see what happens. And yeah, I won't continue waxing about it, but I wonder how you view him now, all these years departed from not just the way we originally bonded, but from however young you were when you first read books like Cosmic Trigger or like Prometheus Rising or whatever. Like how does his way of thinking and his approach land in you now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say it is a part of the foundation still of all of my thinking, like personally and professionally, or I should say creatively. You know, the thing, I mean, he has a lot of great things that he has offered through his work. I was probably, 16, 17, whenever I first started reading those books you talked about. And the thing that really was valuable to me was the notion of, the fact that your reality can be seen through multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
And once you begin to recognize that, then you can become active and use that as a tool, not only with exploring yourself, but also with exploring reality. And the process is really like considering an idea or a thought about yourself, a way that you're feeling, something about, a concept or idea out in the world, some type of interpersonal thing, whatever it may be that you're encountering. And then looking at like, okay, here is my read on this. Here's my perception. Yeah. Let me move this around and try and see it from an outside point of view. Let me see it from that person's point of view. Let me do this. Let me do that. And he would go like, let me look at this from a Satanist's point of view. Right. Let me look at this from a scientist's point of view. Let me just pick whatever random thing just to find these different entry points to be able to uncover a different, view of reality. But ultimately, it's more about, as opposed to, I think, discovering, it's more about letting go of your own subjective bias whenever you're trying to think about these things. And, the process of that is really valuable, because the more that you consider these different entry points into ideas and experience, then what happens is you start moving around in this circular motion. And that circular motion where you start seeing this topic or idea or experience from multiple perspectives, then automatically generates a process of thinking, of critical thinking, where you're really considering what it is that you're interfacing with. And in that process, then comes the arising of a type of perception that is more free from your personal bias. And so, that really blew me away whenever I first read about that and started practicing that, and was able to shift my way of thinking in the world and about myself. And then, another really important part of his philosophy is to fucking humor, man.
Yeah.
Do that, but also have fun with it. Yes. Be a curious, clever little critter, and laugh, man, and have some fun. And that's a huge part of it. So now, even like in life, if I'm in a conversation with someone, I'll be thinking about all this. I'll be doing that process. I'll be thinking about what I think they think, what I think that, things outside of both of us might think. And then my own thinking about my own thinking. I'm doing that all the time. I'm doing that in my writing. Whenever I'm writing something, I'm like, okay, here's how I see this, but how will other people see this? How will this person see this? How will this person see this? Why will that be meaningful to them? What is their life like, that their experience? Can I put my mind inside the mind of the prospect of this individual or the avatar of this person and think like, what would their life be like, the texture of their mind, the emotional responses and feelings that they have, the meaning, the purpose. And whenever they go to, like, why are they going to social media or to my newsletter? And whenever they do open that and they're looking through it, what are they feeling? And what would be something that would draw them to look at something I've written? And how could that thing suit and address what their experiential nature is to have some type of meaningful impact on them? So doing that is really valuable, and especially in relationships too, because it keeps you from falling deep into these reactive patterns and triggers, and it allows you to think from the other person's perspective and therefore become closer in those relationships by understanding where they're at.
Yeah, man. Yeah, great riffs. And what you were alluding to there is what he would call reality tunnels, right? Is your particular POV that you've developed as an organism that grew up in this place with this BS, this belief system. That's one of those great examples of the things he would do. Is like he would always he would just use BS for as an abbreviation for a belief system. And when you realize, when you develop the level of metacognition, you know, and to not make that sound pedantic, to think about your own thinking, to reflect on your own, why do I think this way? Why am I a liberal or a conservative or a Christian or an atheist or whatever it is? And you're really able to get behind the motivations and structure of those things. And this is where I think he gets a little bit paradoxical for me, and where my thought on him has maybe departed a little bit, is that though you realize that reality is flexible, your own belief system and reality tunnel is flexible, in doing that, reflecting on what you think in that sort of metacognition way, then you do, and you do start to meta program, as he would call it. Like you start to program yourself, your consciousness, your way of thinking, your way of being. But I really think, to your point, that circling that you were talking about, it's very interesting that you put it that way, because as you know, I've been deep into Platonism, and I was reading some pretty deep shit the other day about this Platonist named Proclus. But anyway, Proclus would talk about this process of essentially circling the ineffable, like these ideas that are too high for regular human consciousness to comprehend, essentially. But when you go around and around and around this concept, that's like, it might be some huge metaphysical concept, it might be like a mathematical concept, but what ends up happening is you eventually circled, and in the negative space you find something, and you're like, it's not this, it's not that, but it's, to overuse the analogy, because I've said this recently, but the sort of, the classical tale of the blind men feeling the elephant and saying, no, it's like it's a big long skinny thing that's flexible, and then the person that's feeling the back's like, no, it's this big giant thick thing, but they don't realize it's all the same thing. You can do that with your mind around truths that are too big for any one definition, but yet you can sort of get an idea of it in like a Zen koan kind of way. But apart from that, still that idea of reality tunnels, and recognizing what your reality tunnel is, and learning that it can be programmed, and that if you can become courageous enough to question your own bias, you really do grow as a thinker, as a person, and you open up new possibilities to yourself. Like, clearly you must have done that. Like, we've talked a lot about how we grew up, and the fact that there were really no appealing examples around us of like what we wanted to do with our lives, but yet we both went extraordinarily untraditional directions with our lives. And if you don't question, if you don't wonder, if you don't play with your own BS, like you're never going to get there.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the most valuable part of my personality, I think, or I don't know if it's a personality thing or if it's something different than that. The thing that served me probably the best has just been my curiosity, because I just have this relentless curiosity for the like understanding the human experience and playing with it and getting weird with it, because like every single day, and I felt like this since I was young, like um have a moment where I think like, what in the world is happening?
Right.
Like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. Like, how am I like this aware thing in this tube of meat? And there's been like just like billions of other versions of the same thing that have like flowered into existence and then rotted away. And, you know, there's all of this weight and like pressure of being alive, of like, oh, you better do this, you better accomplish this, you better do this, and this is really important. And, you know, you better pay your bills and, you know, dress sharp and whatever and all this stuff. Pick your thing, pick your bias, you know. And I'm like, just none of that, nothing matters. Like, other than embracing the beauty and like wonder of the fact that we're conscious in this bizarre, like hallucinatory experience for a brief moment of time. And I think about that like every day that hits me, and it has forever. And it's the curiosity that probably makes it to where that thought that I have constantly is a valuable thing as opposed to a destructive thing that sent,
Yeah.
I mean, although that thought has sent me into, you know, pretty existentially terrifying places in my life. But not for long, because the curiosity once again finds its way out. But it's just like approaching that, you know, all of the aspects of being with wonder and curiosity really is so useful, because it keeps you, you know, it keeps you fresh, it keeps you invigorated, and it keeps you searching for, you know, the things that like make you feel excited, the things that make
Yeah.
you feel alive. And you can really, I don't know, for me, I think you can get through anything, you know, if you get curious about it, and you can really continue to change and expand and like have this sense of your identity and your personality that just like never atrophies. Like, it's
Hmm.
always as long as you just remain curious in things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think curiosity, you know, that's a word that we throw around that has become a really mundane part of the lexicon. But if you think about what is the pure experience beneath curiosity? And it's this mixture of fear, but a desire to follow an instinct to see what something is. And there's always this negotiation between those two things. And to me, I struggle to remember times where the fear was the right decision. And I'm a pretty I'm like I'm not conservative in the sense that it's like typically used in many ways, but I'm conservative in that I'm not impulsive. Like
Right.
I don't like just make weird, you know, just decisions that I might regret very easily. But at the same time, giving into whenever I notice that I'm not making a decision out of fear, it's like there's something just burning in the back of my brain. You know, it's just like, it's not right to not do something out of fear. And I think that when you start to realize that's what curiosity is, then curiosity really, I think a more accurate word for it is a sort of potential to become more of what you really are, because there's something, and I'm talking on a pretty meta level here. You know, I'm not talking about like, man, I wonder what that barbecue sauce tastes like, or like, you know, whatever mundane thing. I'm talking about when there's that thing kind of roiling around in your brain that you want to explore, that you want to do, that you want to be, that you really want to try, but then you make excuses and you're like, no, I don't think, I got to do that. I'm a this, I can't do that. No. That I think that's you rejecting who you are and who you could be. Like that's and to get mythopoetic about it, that's like the rejection of the call of the hero's journey. That's like saying no to your own individuation. That's like remaining in Plato's cave, I think. And man, that's another, I mean, to circle it back to Robert Anton Wilson, that's one of the most fun things about reading him is he'll come across some weird esoteric shit. Like he'll come across an Aleister Crowley book and be like, I'm going to do these rituals. I'm going to do exactly what this possibly, crazy drug-addled LARPer from like, was doing, or maybe he's a genius and I'll try that. We'll see, I guess, from my own experience. I'm going to try, taking a psychedelic more often than most people tell me that I should and see what happens. I'm going to try this. I always wonder what the hell this is because I just reread Cosmic Trigger. He talked about being obsessed with this Sufi heart chakra technique.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, what is that? And why do chakras and Sufis have anything to do with one another? Because that's like, as far as I know, those two things are not from the same tradition. But whatever it is, he's somebody who tried things and took them to their extremes in a lot of cases. And if it didn't end up actually having the results that he was seeking, it was at least informative, and it served as good fuel for his writing. So it's kind of a win-win, I guess, in some ways.
All right. So a lot of things come up for me during that. One, whenever you said you're conservative, I wanted to see the light behind you change from blue, purple to red. No. Yeah. So first off, the Sufi heart chakra exercise thing you're talking about, I've seen him do it.
Okay.
So I'll tell you what it is. So it's basically you like you close his eyes and hit, like, touch your hands to each place of where the chakra, I guess I'm not on camera. You're touching like, here, like all the way from the bottom. And then you're doing this mantra of going like, and so if I'm not on camera, but you can visualize if I'm touching like the solar plexus and then the chest. So if you're going, he would say, there is no God but God. There is no God but God, over and over. And then you close your eyes and start to visualize what he would say, a whirling white light, like in the mind chakra, in the third eye, until it expanded. And also then you would start to focus on the heart expanding while chanting this, there is no God but God, and touching the chakra centers. And what's funny is I have a recording of him talking about that.
Interesting.
And whenever I was like 20 or something, the first ambient CD I released, there's a song in there that's not even available, but it's called Whirling White Light. And it's a sample of him saying that, like, that flows through the thing. So it's funny that you brought that up. I totally forgot about
that's
that.
Awesome,
that
man.
piece of music. All right. And so the other thing is that, you're talking about this fear of moving into growth. This is something I've thought about a lot, and it's actually something I wrote about in my new book. And we don't have to dive right into it yet, but I'm going to say, like, it is, I mean, the book is called Brave New You, so you can see, there's the immediate connection there. But I've thought a lot about what is that fear that holds us back from moving into the spaces in life that we know we want to go, so that we can grow and change in the way that we feel that we want to. And those don't have to be huge things. They can be small things, right? And I started thinking, like, let me really meditate on that fear. What is that? And as I sat with it, and if I would feel it myself, I noticed that it's an animal type of fear. So if you're like standing next to a river and it's raging, there's almost this like magnetic force that's pushing you back. Like, you take a few steps back and you feel that like fear in the pit of your stomach, and you're like, whoa, that's dangerous. I'm not going to get in there. Right. That's because it's your, animal brain trying to protect you. And the reason it feels scary is because you would be about to make yourself vulnerable. So if you were to get into that river, you'd be very vulnerable, and then you would probably, you could die. And so your body makes you feel the fear because it senses the vulnerability and it pushes you away from it so that you'll retreat away from the physical danger. What's interesting is that the same process is unfolding in mind whenever we look to move into the unknown in our lives or in our thinking. The fear that we feel is real, and it's the same fear. It's the biological fear that we would fear if we're standing at the edge of a river, if we're standing on the edge of a building looking over or something like that. And it's because we're about to make our ego vulnerable.
Right.
We're about to make that deep part of ourself invulnerable to not only others, but vulnerable to our own idea and the way that we think about our own strength and power and ability, because that comes into question. We all go around thinking like, oh, well, I'm a pretty cool guy. I can do this and that and this. And then if you challenge that and you discover that you're not as capable at something, then you're the whole, system falls apart, and your sense of egoic self is put into question. And so that vulnerability is scary. And so therefore our mind protects us from that in the same way it protects us from a physical threat. And it instructs us to reactively pull away from moving into the unknown. The problem with that is that growth lives in the unknown, that we can only develop our lives if we go into that space and pass through that barrier. Right. So, the answer to that, at least what I've discovered and what I write about in the book, is having a series of thinking tools where you are able to mindfully recognize the thinking habit and the behavioral habit whenever you are trying to move into a growth zone. Recognize the arising thoughts that are limiting your mind, the shape that they take, and then being able to have the tools to work with those, to release those, and to move into that unknown space with clarity and some sense of self-confidence. And then the beautiful part about that you can then do for yourself is that in a very small way, and I suggest people move into that space gradually at first, because you want to set attainable goals. Because if you set an unattainable goal, what happens is that you don't make it, then you feel bad about yourself, and then you don't want to try again. Yep. If you set an attainable goal, you attain that, and then you go, I'm pretty good. This is nice. Let's do it again. That feels good. It feels good to win, So you set another attainable goal and another one and another one. And so what happens in this process is you can build this feedback loop of growth and self-confidence, because whenever you look at one thing you want to do, and it could be the most simple thing of like, if you're going to a social situation and normally you'd walk in and you'd be anxious, you can walk in and actually introduce yourself to someone, as opposed to you would have your shoulder slumped and you'd be weird and you kind of hang next to someone that and not really engage with anyone. Even something as basic as that, once you go through that process, you move through that fear and all of the negative, behavioral thought habits that arise. You see like, oh, actually, I was able to do that. Yeah. That's pretty cool. That feels good. And then you can look back and you've got this little receipt. You're like, yeah. I recognized an area that I wanted to grow. I noticed the arising resistance. I intentionally, in the present moment, chose to set that aside and to move into that space. It was good. I, attained it, and it helped me change. And now I can look back and say, I did that. That means I can do it again, because I feel better now, And then you do it again and again and again. And the more that you do it, the more self-confidence it builds.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because this just dawned on me toward the very end of what you were saying, is that this feeds right back into that conversation about reality tunnels as well, because Robert Anton Wilson doesn't really talk about it this way. But if you think about it, one of the core central pillars of your reality tunnel is your idea of who you are and what you do, right? And underneath a lot of those behaviors you were talking about, like not introducing yourself, not doing small actions that could eventually build momentum to the point where the fundamental feel of your life changes, if not the actual things that you're doing, and you're doing more of the things you want to do. But it's like you're possessed by the idea of the person that you think you are because you've been that person.
Right.
And as you get older, it solidifies. even the brain gets more resistant to change, right? There's this like um this inertia that builds up where you're like, this is the way things are, this is the person I am, these are the things I do. I don't do those things, I don't talk like that, I don't have these friends, these whatever it is. And it's like even neuroplasticity dies down, right? It gets harder supposedly to change your brain as you get older. But to your point, small mundane changes like that create this momentum, or like it starts to just make it so that you, even if you don't realize it or come to the conscious realization of, hey, I'm slowly becoming a different person, that's what you're doing. Like by undergoing those incremental practical changes, you're alleviating that possession, that idea of who you are. You're making your reality tunnel more flexible. You're probably dialing up neuroplasticity and your ability to change um, your literal brain structure. And I think that's important to say, because sometimes the small mundane changes, they just don't sound like they're going to amount to much. It's like, I don't, like, who cares if I don't take the walk or introduce myself or whatever. But the excuses have to end sometime, and the momentum shift also has to begin sometime, right?
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and I love what you mentioned there, because maybe we're mind melding here as we usually do, but that's actually the opening that I present in the book. So you like presented the opening thing that the problem is that we live in the same patterns for so long that we mistake them for what's normal, right? And the issue is that as we're growing into an adult, we don't have the agency to really choose our choices. We don't have the self-awareness. We don't have the intentionality and the sense of presence to be able to decide who we're going to be. We're living in a reactionary state, and things are happening around us in our childhoods and in high school. And once we get out, go to college, like life is happening around us. And we may be trying to make a choice here or there, but it's mainly a unaware, just perpetual state of reaction. And so all of those behavioral habits, all of those thinking habits, and the ways in which we view the world mold before we really start trying to have any intentionality around molding those. And they happen so gradually and so slowly that, as you said, we get used to them. And then we're like, well, this is what is. Like, this is what's normal. This is what my life is.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's what holds people back, is you mistake what happened to have happened in your life for all that there is. And whenever you begin to question that, and you can see outside of that, then you recognize that actually everything is limitless. And I don't mean that in like a corny way. It's like you can do and change in any way that you want. You just need to have the awareness to be able to see the area that it is, and then the tools to move towards doing that.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And another core feature that we haven't gotten into yet that is really central of your approach and the way that you came to a lot of these realizations for yourself is through meditation, through mindfulness. And another thing that I'm loving about I keep saying recent, but it's probably been like a year and a half or close to 2 years at this point, that I've been starting to get more obsessed with Platonism and that whole tradition, is although that lineage doesn't ever directly prescribe Eastern meditative techniques, and by the time you do get to thinkers like Plotinus, he is using language that sounds extremely contemplative and inward facing. He literally talks about the importance of removing yourself from sensory input if you want to understand truth and you want to understand beauty, and going deeper and deeper into the mind space to start seeing the truth of what he would say your soul is, because they use the word psyche for soul, which is, I mean, that's just such an epiphany for me. Like the first time I was reading Plato, and I'm like, they're using the word soul, and then I see that it's psyche, and I'm like, as in psyche? And then I'm like, oh my God, this makes so much more sense, because to them, this division between this nebulous thing that we call the soul, that's like I don't believe that I have this weird energy thing. I don't, whatever it is. I don't know what, like, there's a very specific definition of what it is for the Greeks. And the part of you that feels, that has passion, and but also has the ability to operate at a higher, cleaner level and begin to touch deeper levels of reality than even just what you are. Anyway, whatever, however you look at that, there's something that happens when you can reach these more still psychological states, neurological states, meditative states, modes of consciousness, whatever it is, that almost just sort of moves all those ideas aside. Those ideas that we were talking about before of like, of who you are, of what you do, of what's possible, of, well, I don't do that. I can't do that. Well, I'm too old to, I'm too young to, whatever it is, I'm too stupid. And when you reach those more, and it's not even just states of mind, it's like, as you're well aware, it's like your nervous system is more calm. Thoughts just are more clear. Things seem like they're moving slower and they're not so elusive. And when you get to those states of mind, things just don't feel as complicated. It just feels like, yeah, that's probably possible. I just need to do this, you know? And there's something cumulative too. And this is something I'd like to talk to you about, is you might do it once and it feels kind of good to just like slow your brain waves down, calm your nervous system. But over time, there's like this cumulative thing that happens where your normal base reality changes. And that's something I think is missed a lot in these conversations about like meditation, mindfulness. It's like talked about like it's good for you and it's good for your brain. It's good, but it changes your experience of reality, like permanently, I think, the more you do it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is something that is one of the most crucial and important aspects of meditation that, like you said, a lot of people don't talk about. Probably because it's a bit more abstract than this will help you with anxiety. It's got a little more meat on the bone than that. So essentially most of us, particularly in the, this era of technology, are living in a perpetual fight or flight mode. We're in the, sympathetic nervous system state, which is the, fight or flight state. So we're making choices and living out of fear, and we're living in a reactionary state. We're also generally living in a state where we scarcity mindset, all of these things. So even if we don't recognize it, we are living that way because we, like we talked about earlier, we don't know that there's a different way to feel. So we're like, oh yeah, I'm always sort of like frantic and like my heart's pumping, and I'm usually pretty anxious, and like I don't really think about what I'm doing in the moment. I generally post-event process, like I'll say a bunch of shit and then later I'll think about it and I'm like, oh, I wish I hadn't said that, or like I made this choice and I committed this thing, and then later I'm like, I hate this. I wish I hadn't done that. And I'm kind of like drifting through my life and reality, and without a lot of say in the matter. And that's because a person is in this, they're literally fighting or flighting. You're either being aggressive or you're fleeing and practicing avoidance from every type of thing that you're experiencing in your life, and you're not present for that. And so therefore you can't have that clarity and intentionality to choose what's happening in the moment, as opposed to just having it be on autopilot. So what happens is that this is a really fascinating part of the kind of neuroscience of meditation to me, is that the mind doesn't recognize like our environment outside of us in the same contextual way that we do on a conscious level, right? So the ancient brain doesn't recognize that. It reacts to what the body is experiencing a lot of times, right? So if we are tense, and if our heart is beating, and we're all and we're just scrolling and drinking coffee and like going through emails and like putting our attention in a lot of different places and we're just bound up and anxious, then our mind is going to think, I should say our brain thinks that our environment is dangerous. Because if you look at what's the physical behavior that we're doing, we're tense, we're frustrated, we're scurrying around, that's the physical representation of someone in a dangerous environment. Like whenever you're in a hot tub, you're just completely expanded, relaxed, breathing slowly, totally just turning into soup. Whenever you are if you were like lost in the jungle, you would be really uptight. You'd be looking all around because there's threats everywhere. You're looking for threats. You're scanning. You're armored physically. Shoulders are tight. Chest is tight. Breath is short. Heart is racing. So our brain thinks, oh, this environment is unsafe. Let's stay in fight or flight mode because that's what we need to stay in to be, to survive. So we're in survival mode. So what happens is when we start practicing meditation, you are intentionally breathing slowly. You're calming and relaxing the muscles in the body. And what that's doing is it's sending signals from your body to your brain that your body is safe. And whenever your ancient brain, like your animal brain, starts to get the idea that our physical surroundings are safe now. So now we can relax the body more. We can allow the body to relax even more. We can switch the nervous system state over from sympathetic to parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest state. That's where you naturally shift after you eat, after you go to the bathroom, after you have sex, all the places where you wouldn't be fighting, hypothetically. I don't know what you're into, but hypothetically, you wouldn't be fighting. That's why the body goes to those, because it only does those things when it's safe. Like you're not eating in the middle of a battle. You're not having sex while you're in the middle of a gunfight, generally. Traditionally,
that's advanced. We'll talk about that.
Like animals
only content.
Like your dog doesn't go to the bathroom whenever it's scared. Like it's like, oh, this is a safe moment. I'll do it. And that's also, by the way, why your dog will look at you when it's going to the bathroom, because they look at you to make sure that you're looking around, like you got their back while they're doing that, which I always find interesting. They're not creeps, they're actually like, hey, watch my back while I go to the bathroom. So as we meditate and we take these slow, calm breaths, we send these signals to our mind that tells it that our body is safe. Our nervous system then shifts over to the parasympathetic mode, and that lasts for a short period of time. But that's why the consistency of meditation is so important, because as you're meditating every day or 5 times a week for at least 5-10 minutes, the more you do that, the more time that your body spends in this rest and digest nervous system state. Now what happens is that with more consistency over more time, whenever you're in that the rest and digest, this parasympathetic nervous system state where you're calm, you're relaxed, you're present, you're making clear choices, that lasts and extends into your waking reality whenever you're out just living your normal life. That makes it to where you're better equipped to deal with the pressures and stresses of living, and therefore less likely to slide back into the reactionary fear-based fight or flight state. Then as you continue to practice your meditation, you continue to push that threshold further and further forward so that you're spending more and more time in the parasympathetic nervous system state and less time in the fight or flight state, until you were once always in fight or flight mode. You can move over to where or not always, but 99% of the time, you can move that to the other direction to where you are 99% of the time in this rest and digest, calm nervous system state that's properly regulated. And so that's why over this period of time of meditation, the longer that you do it, that's why I stress compound interest in meditation so much. Because the more consistently you do it over time, the more that shift starts to take place. And as I've written in various places, that's why mindfulness or meditative wisdom or insight seems to fade in over time. It's not a light switch that clicks. it slowly, gradually starts to fade in your life until you hit a point to where you become conscious of it. And you're like, oh, wow, I feel more calm. I feel comfortable in my body. I feel like I am in control and I'm consciously navigating every moment of my language, of my decision making, of my impulses, of my desires, even around, food or something like that. Or it could be the desire around what you want to, the direction of your career or something like that, or a relationship. And so you begin to recognize that. And then that is usually a pretty transformative moment for people, because they see a situation in which, wow, all of this stuff is really paying off, and here's the proof. And then from there, one would be wise to continue doing it, and people usually do stick with it once they see how powerful that and how long lasting and permanent that change can be.
Yeah, man. Yeah, this is really reminding me too of have you ever talked to Dr. Lisa Miller?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so you're aware she has this book called The Awakened Brain. She's a psychologist from Columbia, and she started it might be like the Spirituality Mind Body Institute or something. I can't remember the exact terminology. But she has shown what you're talking about is not only a felt psychological shift, the brain itself actually changes. The brain waves that come, like the actual architecture of the brain begins to change, and the brain waves themselves start to change. And there are even some like potentially woo woo, like where neuroscience and psychology really bleed into spirituality, is that I believe it's the posterior alpha waves that come off like the back of the brain are at the exact same frequency as the Schumann resonance, which is like the native wavelength of energy coming off the earth. Yeah. So you could literally think of this as you are operating on some kind of almost like meta frequency of nature in some way. And that sounds like kind of woo, but also it's measurable. It's like, it's something that, I mean, this is a tenured professor saying this stuff, and she has done peer-reviewed studies on it. And that's really interesting. And it also really makes me wish, I told you before we were recording, that I've been just deep into trying to make this video on the more esoteric aspects of Plato's cave and what it really means to be the person who comes out of the cave. And I don't have any like neuroscience elements of it, but this awakened brain part of it is absolutely fits into that whole conversation, which is, that's a whole rabbit hole I could go down. And I guess maybe it'd be interesting to go down, but that's definitely an important part of it, because a lot of people, I love getting into the more abstract, esoteric, kind of big, psycho-spiritual ideas around these things. But a lot of people want that neuroscience element. So it's not just these like nebulous philosophical concepts. But I think that that's very true, and that all of this is knit together. I hope that made sense, because it makes sense in my mind, but I don't know if I explained the connection exactly.
Yeah, no. And also the Schumann resonance is interesting. And that's like the, as you said, the resonance of the earth. And that's why, like, we literally have like the electrical engineering system in your house is grounded into the earth. Like, that's why that, like, whenever you hear like an electric stick, if it's not ground, you'll get shocked. It's literally like it grounds it into the earth, and it's like connecting with that frequency. And people have like, they sell grounding mats, which is basically like, for anyone that doesn't know, I think it's made out of aluminum or steel or something like that, something that conducts. And it's like a mat that's woven out of that. And then you can go out and like plug it. You can actually plug it into the ground, like the bottom hole in your plug in your wall. And because that goes in literally into the ground. And so you have the Schumann resonance like on this mat that you can sit on. But, and who knows if that does anything, but surely, like, that's why they say, like, walk in the grass barefoot,
Yeah.
that's like really healthy, and it's been proven to be healthy because you're like regrounding yourself to nature quite literally. And if we think about your ass alpha waves, those fat posterior, waves coming off the brain's ass,
Yeah. You want a thick
then
you want a thick ass up top as well
oh yes you
in the
do.
in the skull. Yeah.
Yes you do. Um, so if you think about those, I mean, it makes sense in a like I'm a guy in a bar talking about this type of way that everything is this emergent property of nature. And if our planet that we're on has a particular frequency or vibration, one would think that being in tune with that and having like where the foundation of your consciousness emanates from, being in tune with the earth's vibration would be a good thing. And that perhaps the reason why we aren't that way is because of kind of general modernity of civilization has increased pacing and drawn us outside of ourselves and made us, anxious and whatnot. And so we're getting away from our natural brainwave frequency, but to reconnect it and to attune it to the earth's once again seems, I mean, it checks out, makes sense to me theoretically.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that this I don't know if I want to fully reveal what I was alluding to before about the more esoteric takeaway from Plato's cave is that nobody talks about. But I will just say that this idea of compound interest, slow change until suddenly your whole not just belief system, but in that meta programming Robert Anton Wilson kind of sense, your whole consciousness shifts toward a different value system where, yes, I want to stress, we all play these games, we all got to do stuff, we all got to eat, we all got to have a practical feet on the ground life, but your deeper compass, it's like the magnetic pole of its orientation changes or something, and you just can't live in a certain way anymore. You can't concern yourself with certain things anymore. Your hierarchy of values just is not such that you can really give a fuck about a lot of the mundane things like you used to, like when you were younger, the things that used to preoccupy you and probably still preoccupy a lot of your friends, right? And that I think is something that all of the mystical traditions talk about, is this gradual shift toward the greater, whether you're calling it God, whether you're, well, I guess Platonists also call it God, or they call it like the form of the good, or Robert Anton Wilson, I don't even know what he would call it, because I don't know if he has like an ontological true north. But I think you see it in his, to return to him again, I think you do see it in his overall commitment to exploring ideas and have experiences for himself. Like, although he says, he's got this whole reputation of like model agnosticism is this whole thing, is it's like, but it seems like you're after that nebulous thing. Even if you're saying you don't think it exists, or we can't know that it exists, it's like, well, then why are you doing all this?
Yeah.
Like, there's clearly something that you're searching for, right? So it's kind of like your actions are speaking louder than some of the things you're writing in that sense. But what I almost don't think it matters what we call it, I guess is what I'm trying to get to, is it's like what matters is that your felt sense of who you are and what's important changes, and then the things that you do overflow into the world in a more positive way as a result of that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I would say that old Pope Bob would say that he's even agnostic about his agnosticism.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And he's clearly trying to find out what I think he would say. I think a quote of his, a verbal quote is, I'm trying to figure out what the fuck is going on in this place or in this universe. That's basically it. Is like, I don't know. And I'm trying to just figure it out. And the only way to get there is to mess with your brain and look through different templates to get as outside of yourself and to as inside of yourself as you can, to think differently, and then to actually, explore and be like irrational and rational at the same time, and just, have fun while you're doing it. And to your point, like, yeah, the goal of that is to be like, to not hold yourself back, so that you don't get trapped in your own life. If you're always doing that, you're always changing and expanding and growing. And that process of continuous change and growth leads, in my view, to what you were just talking about, which is like, if you're always expanding, then you have this appetite for like possibility. You have this hunger for, and the curiosity and the excitement for like growth and change, because growth and change are what make our lives stay, they keep them full of blood. It's what keeps us like, from the muscles of our wonder muscles from atrophying, but you have to exercise them. But that's how you keep feeling alive. I mean, that's the thing. I want to, like, I can't feel like I can't say that or write about that enough, is like, especially as you get a little bit older, like, you have to keep focusing on what makes you feel alive and fucking prioritizing it and doing it again and again. Make it a feature, not something that you feel guilty, doing or spending some time on once a week or something like that. Like, live in that space of like whatever it is that gives you that feeling where you're levitating, that you feel a little like you're getting away with something, that you're like, that gives you this blast of energy that you don't get anywhere else. Like, do that as much as possible.
Yeah.
Because that's how you develop that hunger for perpetual growth and self-discovery and change. And that's actually the very last chapter of my book is called An Appetite for Possible Things.
Ooh,
And it's talking about this, this very thing, which that's a quote from Bertrand Russell, which I've wanted to use forever. I was glad I got to finally use it because I love that phrase so much, but that's how we keep feeling alive. And that's, I think, it shifts, like you were saying, it shifts your whole outlook on the world. And then it shifts like how the people that feel as well. That's the crazy thing about it, is that like curiosity is contagious. Like the excitement from self-exploration, exploring the world, and like allowing yourself to change and grow, like that shit has this energy and this vibe that the people around you can feel. And it not only is it energizing to other people, but then whenever they see you out there on the edge of reality, like seeing what you can get away with, to quote Bob, then it shows them that it's possible for them too.
Yeah. What is that quote? That
it's reality is what you
reality
can get
is
away
what you
with.
can. Yeah. Reality is what you can get away with. Yeah. I'd like to hear you riff on what exactly you think that means. But I also wanted to ask you. So for me, I think I read Cosmic Trigger when I was probably about 20. Like a friend, not even a super close friend. I'm assuming we were probably, and if I didn't say this for anyone that doesn't know, Cosmic Trigger is my favorite Robert Anton Wilson book, but it's his sort of memoir of experiments in high weirdness and what he would call meta programming, and this, like, just very strange things, a lot of synchronicities and stuff that happened to him throughout all of these different consciousness meta programming experiments he did. And also, it's orbited by all these like really influential thinkers. Like he has a lot of conversations with Timothy Leary, just Alan Watts, a lot of different people that influenced him or that he directly had conversations and influenced by. But it's just funny that this friend that I didn't even know that well gave me this book because it sent me down like a really, really important um, personal rabbit hole transformation. But I'm wondering for you, I mean, even that must have really just like lit some kind of Discordian wonder wick in your brain as a teenager. Like, did in your early days, I know we've talked about this at some point, but I can't remember. In your early days, did you try a lot of the things that he did, either in that book or Prometheus Rising? Because Prometheus Rising, um, also again for people that don't know this book, this is sort of his. It's almost like a meta programming guidebook where he goes through these ideas of like circuits of consciousness that I think that might come from Leary. I can't even remember now if that was like Leary's theory of like these, is it 9 circuits of consciousness or something like that? And he gives these different experiments um, that you can do and these sort of like prescriptions of ways you can like mind fuck yourself or sort of bend your reality and play with your interpretation of all of that stuff. Do you remember as a kid playing with any of that stuff and what happened?
Oh yeah, I did everything. Yeah, and I suppose it's no surprise that I find it interesting that you like Cosmic Trigger, which I think it's a great one too. But Prometheus Rising was always my
Hmm.
Bible, which it makes sense given my interests, and personality, because it's very like self-experimental,
Yeah.
and kind of procedural. Uh, and yeah, I mean, I did them all, and they're always very enlightening, very fun. Um, even like something like I'm a little. It's been a while, since I've
Yeah. Yeah.
I've
Same.
read them, but even something about like reading um, a competing political news sites for like a week and then go read another one for a week. Even something as simple as that is like mind blowing. And you can do that, if you're if you're like a Reddit user or something, go to like politics and read that, subreddit for a week only. And then the next week, go to the conservative and read. And it's crazy how there's just these two different universes of
Yeah.
what's happening in the world. And I suppose you could, if you look at Fox News versus CNN or whatever, just these pictures that are painted about like reality, like what's impending, what's important, what's happening, how things are, like what's going to happen. They're both just completely different stories. It's crazy. And both of them, of course, are, it's all imaginary. It's just all bullshit.
Right.
Um,
Well,
with
that yeah, no, sorry. I don't want to interrupt you.
I was just going to say, with you using tiny kernels of truth to then spin giant stories that have all of these implications and connections and perspectives ultimately that aren't necessarily, they're not fact, but they're presented as fact.
Mhm. Mhm.
So those, like an exercise like that, is super valuable because one can do that, and then you can do it with anything. Like, listen, it doesn't have to be politics. You could just any contrasting view of the world. Like I remember, like whenever I was a teenager, I was like, I guess I should read the Christian Bible and the Satanic Bible back to
Whoa.
back and see, just for fun, see what the worldviews are like. But I did all sorts of those things, and what it does ultimately, the goal of those, the reason one would do that, is to, one, be able to spot the bias of reality that everyone is serving you all the time, including me. I'm serving everyone one right now. Even my bias of no bias is this bias that I'm serving everyone. But it really helps you see your own story. It helps you see how you're creating a narrative about reality and becoming attached to it in the ways that is helping and harming you. It's helping you because it creates a continuity to your own existence and your own self-awareness. It allows you to create a sense of storied self, which starts somewhere and hopefully ends somewhere else, which is better and more realized. and that can make one feel good about themselves and increase self-confidence and make you have a better view of the world. And of course, on the negative side of things, what it will do is make you latch on to and remain attached to stories that are about yourself that limit you, that keep you from, in negative mind states, that make you more cynical, that make you, treat other people with less perhaps respect or whatever that it might be, whatever one's particular hangups are. And so by recognizing that you're creating this story about reality, you can then, of course, awareness is the first step to any type of growth. And once you become aware of those things, you could then work to let them go and live free from those thought patterns and that narrative that keeps you locked into an old way of being that isn't serving you in the present.
Yeah, man. And I love everything you just said. And that leaves us in this place of there's a real decision that people are unconsciously making on a daily basis. And that decision is to continue doing the things they've been doing, consuming the media they've been consuming, which then informs the way that they think. Because the unsaid thing in that little experiment that you mentioned there of like, try just reading the opposite viewpoints media for a week, 2 weeks, whatever. The unsaid thing is not that, oh, I'm going to go like read this thing that I don't agree with and, just sit there and read it and be like, this isn't true. Okay, I get it. Yeah, like they think this way. I think this way. No. The point of the experiment is to do it for long enough that it seeps into the way that you think, to the point where it's actually a bit dangerous because you start to feel yourself getting sucked into that way of thinking. Like you're talking to your friend and all of a sudden you feel compelled to say the thing that you read on that website for some reason. And then like, aha, now my reality tunnel is changing. And that's probably when you want to disengage.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can commit to doing things like that to the point where it actually is a little bit dangerous, that's when you know that you're playing in potent territory, in potent reality tunnel bending territory. And that's, if you continuously do that, you can actually start to do what I think Socrates was doing in ancient Athens. That is the reason we still talk about him today, is you actually start to become this extremely rare being that is living in service of truth rather than what is comfortable, what will get me up whatever social ladder I want to get up, what will give people the perception of me I want them to have. If you can really make all of those things ancillary to just going after truth and just trying to have the clearest mind possible, because I think there's a straight line between having a clear, unperturbed mind and perceiving reality as it actually is. And as such, having at least a little bit of a deeper idea of truth. If you can do that, you really are, I think, one of the rarest kinds of beings on the planet. And we could use different mouth noises to describe what that person is. I think that person is a philosopher. Like that's what the Platonists would have said. I don't think they're a philosopher in like the modern pedantic weighing and measuring every single word kind of sense, though that stuff has its place too. But it's so important, dude. Like for me, that constantly finding a way to get underneath my own BS bullshit and belief system, that's like the most important thing to me. And I do think that there is ultimately, and this is where I think in the 15 years since I first read, actually more than 15 years now, since I first read Cosmic Trigger, I agree to with everything and love everything that he's doing and saying, but I think my ultimate interpretation of reality has changed in that, and this is probably my first major philosophical pivot since I've started the pod, because I've always been the perennial agnostic, mystic, weirdo. Wow, everything's weird. Like, look at how weird everything is. Something's going on, but we'll never know. I do think that there is a truth, and I do think you can get closer to the truth, even if you can't fully ever get there. But I think that's a limitation of the human condition. It's not the true ontological state of reality. Like, I think there is a true ontological state. I think there is a spiritual truth. I think there is a higher truth. And I think you can get closer, but I don't think as a human you can fully arrive. But I think that through logic, through experience, through living in this way that we've talked about and following it to the very, very end of your life, you can reach this place of a deep gnosis kind of knowing. And that's why Socrates was willing to kill himself. That's why Socrates was willing to drink the hemlock, because he was like, I know that this is bullshit. And it's more important for me to follow what I know is right to the grave than it is for me to live 5 more years or 10 more years or whatever it is. And that's what I admire and like strive toward in my own, hunt for like the fucking psycho spiritual protein, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting is that I would have thought you already saw the like a sense of objective truth as the foundation. But yeah, I mean, I agree. I've long felt that way as well. And the game is closing the gap as much as you can between your perception of it and it. But I think it's inaccessible ultimately, like in totality, because as you say, we're working through the mainframe of a human nervous system, which has an inherent level of limitation. And, that's fine. Like no creature is going to, because if you're in the world, not of the world, that's
right.
the difference.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
If you were of the world, you would just become some like wave of energy or something. And then you are the thing that we're talking about trying to understand, but you can't understand it because you're like this formless thing that isn't conscious. But if you're of the world, then you're a physical being, which then can't access the very stuff that you're made of.
Yeah. I want to ask you, so our last conversation, we were talking a lot about what Buddhists would call jhanas, which are like these states that you can achieve, these deep meditative states that you can achieve, that some sects of Buddhism consider to be almost like checkpoints or like initiations or sort of proof that you've reached a certain level of consciousness. And we don't have to revisit all of those, but the reason I wanted to reintroduce that to this conversation about, like what is the ultimate truth, what blah, 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 is do you think achieving states like that, especially like the really deep kind of formless, luminous or emptiness, I'm not going to pretend I've achieved this state. I haven't. But I have achieved some pretty profound states through meditation and especially through psychedelics. But and so have you, but I'm curious if you think those states tell you anything about reality, or if those states just tell you something about your own mind in a private sense, or if it's both, or if it's whatever. I'm curious if you have an opinion on that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's both. I mean, so in a state where you would be a state that's referred to as like non-perception state, you would be in meditation, you would have backed out of the attachment to the signs or symbols that you're applying to the phenomenon which you're perceiving, and let go of those, and then simply just experience the raw input of your senses without the context of symbolism. And once you're in that state, then you can move backwards from the attachment and the grasping of that very like raw sense information itself, and perceive like a level of awareness that is completely existing apart from the distraction of like the texture of reality that you're forced to experience in waking consciousness, and you can become aware of a state of pure being that's just um like an infinite ocean that has no water, I guess is a way to
Wow.
describe it. And I've experienced that many times. It's actually what, and I'm not promoting it, but whenever I figured out the ways to get to that space, that's why I made the coming home meditation course. Cause I was like, I have to, this is so amazing and like profound and wild. I need to write the map. And if anyone wants to take it, then they're welcome to, but it's not going to particularly be easy and it will take a lot of time, but here it is. Here are the steps. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's hugely significant to have that experience. You know, it shows you the true nature of the illusion of self, for one, because that's the interesting thing about letting go of all of those signs and symbols of relation to reality is as you continue to back out, you have, you know, the very like symbols you use to identify your own sense of identity and story are released in that process. And it shows you like, oh, right, I'm this thing that's like this impermanent capital S thing that's always in flux and flow. And that's not stable. And then it shows you that the nature of reality, like the texture on top of it isn't stable, but what's underneath it is.
Whoa. Okay. Say more about that.
Yeah. So, and I'm sorry if this is if I'm talking too abstract. I'm just trying to
No, you're
find
not.
words
Not for me.
to
Not for
describe,
me. Yeah.
trying to describe this to you. And like, I haven't really, I don't know, it's not something I talk about a lot, obviously.
Well, it is hard to talk about, but that idea of really getting to you could either view it as the ground level or the roof, I guess, of what's possible to experience this ocean of nothingness, this sensation of a felt, Platonists would say like noesis of I am in a like the idea of me as self is illusion, a felt sense realization of that, but that there's like a something beneath all of that that is stable. Like I'm curious what you make of that.
I mean, that's emptiness, you know, that's the form of informless. It's like, it's like the nature of being. It's like the DOS boot system of reality, you know? And yeah, you can, it's pretty far out. And I'll tell you, like, the stages that go further than that, in meditation, the final stage, like after that would be to then, when you're in that state of non-perception, then returning the focus like to the light in which is keeping on your awareness of that state of emptiness going, and then releasing that. And that's the instruction to reach nirvana, because nirvana is translation that means blown out or blown away. It's literally like a candle like that. So it's talking about your capital S self-consciousness being like, whew, and then what happens, right? So then you're supposed to become liberated and move into this indescribable place of non-suffering, of nirvana. In my experience, whenever I got to that state, tuned into the little point of light of consciousness that was flickering, that was perceiving all of that, and let it go, and quite literally was visualizing it being like blown away into just nothingness. Like it kind of felt like being almost asleep or something. And then like asleep without dreaming. And then I was in that, state for I think it was probably 5 minutes or something. And then coming out of it. And then, I think after experiencing that, I was very, very, like kind of demure, like very detached. And I'm surprised.
I can see that.
Yeah. And very like, I don't know. It was wild. And then I remember I went and I had coffee with a friend I hadn't seen in like a year. And he was like, "So, how you doing?" And I was like, fine." And he's like, "What have you been like thinking about recently?" And I was like, "Well, like everything is an illusion," you know.
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Hey, anyways, there's no point to go further than that." But yeah, it's I did kind of. It took me a couple of weeks, I think, to kind of get back out of that after going that deep into it. And I will say that also to obtain that state, I was meditating for at least an hour a day for months. It's some deep moves. You're not going to do that in 5 minutes.
No, for sure. Yeah, and I've sort of, so as you know, I've gone on and off with my meditation. I'm in an on phase now. My practice typically takes like 30 or so minutes at a time. I can't really do it in less than that. But even with that, I still feel a little bit of that sense of detachment that you're talking about, where it just feels like things don't matter as much.
Right.
Like it's like a lot. I try to do it before I eat because I really like, and this is just things I've read from multiple traditions. Like, and I think some of this is ritualistic and arguably you don't have to do it, but I think that it adds to the experience for sure. And like changes the psychology around what it is to treat it a bit more ritualistic of like, do it fasted, do it when your body is clean. I like to do that as well. Things like that. Normally it'd be like, oh, I'm hungry. What do I want to eat? Maybe I'll go here. Maybe I get in this state where I'm like, I don't really care. Like, I don't really, who cares what I eat? Who cares about this? And I think in a sense you could view that as something that's kind of sad, or like, oh, so you're like losing your like enjoyment. And it's like, it's not that, because underneath that, there's like, it's bolstered on like a sense of like, everything's good.
Exactly. I was hoping you'd say that. Yeah. Because I'm that state you're talking about. I think that's how I feel all the time. And I was having a conversation with someone somewhat recently about that, and they were like, "What's your favorite burger in Austin?" And I was like, "I don't know. I don't really have one." And they were like, "Really, mine is this. It's the best thing." Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, "Yeah, I don't really have any favorite places or foods." And he was like, "That's just really sad." I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "Because like you're not enjoying anything." I was like, "No, you're seeing this inside out. I don't have any preferences around what I eat or where I eat because everything is amazing." It's the inverse. It's not finding one thing and going like, this meets all of my criteria. It's amazing. Because when you do that, you're shaving down your consciousness to a fine point and then agreeing that this set of things hits all of your desired preferences and makes you happy. If you expand that in the other direction, and you, again, going back to curiosity, if you experience the raw nature of what it is in itself, then anything you experience can be, you can eat one single black bean and be like, holy shit, that was a journey, but
especially if you're like fast, and like, this might sound ridiculous to some people, but if you try like fasting for like a day, 2 days, and then a bite of anything is pretty major.
Yeah. So can you keep your mind in that state of readiness and openness in regular life? That's the quest, that's the journey to being truly, ultimately to being free, but also to being really like, that's actual mindfulness and insight.
Yeah.
But you then apply that to everything. Apply that to how you're thinking, how you're feeling, what you're talking, what you're like, the physical nature of your being, how you think about other people. Like when that becomes the root processing of your consciousness, then you have that tectonic shift.
Right, right. So check this out. So this is one of the more I've gone into the Greek mystical Platonic stuff, the more I've become pretty certain that it's all pointing to the same thing as the Eastern stuff, with a sort of different emphasis and a different way of talking about things. And I'm guessing you're somewhat familiar with this idea of like a chain of being, like the sort of emanationist metaphysics of, we're in this strata of reality, essentially. Then there's this one, then there's this one, then there's this one. And that goes on and on and on and on for the Platonists until you get back to this non-dual one. And there's a debate amongst them as to whether or not a human can get that far, or like where they can get, or if they can only go sideways, not up. There's all these debates. But an idea that really kind of blew my mind and made me connect the dots in an interesting way between Eastern and Western is that there's a kind of consciousness that you can achieve that it's not a perception in the way that we think about perception, but it's sort of like an epiphany where you've experienced a certain truth. And a low level of this is actually like math. And this is why Platonists are obsessed with math and geometry and stuff. Because if you think about the sensation of what it's like to understand something, like if I show you this big line of mathematical, like an equation, you're like, I don't know what that is. And I'm like, okay. And then I explain it to you and you just still don't get it and still don't get it and still don't get it. And then you go home and like 20 minutes, you're playing with it and you're like, I get it. There's something that happened there. Your mind is different now than it was before you understood that. So this is an example of what they're talking about, is that in a sense, your psyche, your soul, unlocked something or moved into something or illuminated something that it didn't have before. And it's easy to talk about math like that. What's not as easy to talk about is that what you just described is the same thing in a different way that's more abstract and more difficult to talk about. And that whole chain of being that, which includes archetypes, gods, like forces, all of that shit, they say that there is a mode of consciousness or an epiphany essentially associated with every single one of those. And when I connected those dots where it's like, they are talking metaphysically, but they're also talking what we would today say psychologically. Also, because it's happening through your own consciousness in a way, it's epistemological because it's about knowing it and having the experience of knowing it. That was kind of an epiphany for me, that you can have these same experiences. And today we just think about, inner, my psychology, my brain, my psychology. But you can think of it this way and it makes an equal amount of sense. I've found the more that I've thought about it. I don't know if you've ever played with it in that way or if that brings anything up for you.
A little bit. I mean, I think that all of those, it all connects. Like everything tends to just connect. And it's as if it's like the same general system continues to emerge over time and space. It just looks different wherever it's arising. It's like, that's why there's some weird, it seems as though there's some strange like fundamental code in human brains that like just keep developing the same system again and again and again. And it's fascinating to see how some of them articulate certain things better than others. And then if you look at them all, that's why I think spiritual eclecticism can be valuable, because you look at them all and you can kind of create this big picture idea of it becomes an equation, like you were just saying. And you can be like, okay, well, the Buddhists say this, Platonists say this, Hindus say this, Sufis say this, Zenists say this, science says this. Interesting. Like, let's all connect connect it and create this big picture and see what I think. What do I say?
Yeah. And you're doing that.
Yeah.
You're doing
Yes,
that
sir.
in a new book. And speaking of the new book, I have not gotten it yet, and we've sort of tickled it here and there throughout the conversation. But I'm curious if there's anything else from the book in particular that either you wanted to share or that fits in with what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think that, we touched on some points. I think people get a general idea that it's a map, it's a plan essentially that I made, that I want people to feel how we were just talking about feeling. This whole podcast, this path we've been discussing of understanding your mind, beginning to increase your self-awareness, learning the tools you need to shift your mind from this limited view to one that is focused on meaning and wonder and curiosity and possibility, and then learning how to develop the self-confidence and the clarity to begin moving into those spaces of the unknown, which then will give your life the sense of wonder and meaning and excitement that we were discussing. And by doing that, that only strengthens the confidence that you have, in which you're able to continue walking, the path that you most deeply on a, spiritual level want to walk. And, one of the things that I think about, a distinction I like to make that I've thought about, is like in the title, Brave New You of the book, is like, people think about bravery as though it's something outside of themselves that they need to face. They think there's a threat on the horizon, so I'll be brave. There is, some situation I need to get into, so I'll be brave and I'll face it. But I don't really think about bravery in terms of the inverse of that. It's listening inward to that intuitive voice, to that thing that's arising that you can't even put words on a lot of time. The feel in which that comes into you that leaves you feeling drawn towards certain things or choices or paths in your life. And the bravery is learning how to trust that feeling and that internal voice and start listening to its guidance, as opposed to allowing the outside world and what seems and appears meaningful to other people and what appears to be the rules of the game to dictate what you'll allow yourself to listen to, and what you'll allow yourself to do. Instead of just going, you know what, I'm going to not worry about all that other stuff. I'm going to trust the voice that's arising within, that inner guidance, and allow that to dictate the path that I walk into the world. And to me, that's really what bravery is about. And that's what the entire book ends up being, is to guide someone into being able to do that.
Yeah, man. Really well said. And it stirs my wonder beans up for sure. And the thing that I also feel like I always get sort of untethered into these big meta concepts in this conversation. But one thing I really like that you do in your writing and in the content you put out is you're informed by all that stuff, but then you make it super practical. And I just want to communicate the fact that all of the practical shit about the way I've been able to do everything that I do, like research, sit on my ass till I figure out how to do something, or till I get something done, or until something feels right. All of this stuff feeds into the practical stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like those like day-to-day virtues that you require to become the person that you want to be in like a mundane way. Like can you read that whole article that you want to read without getting distracted? Can you sit down and write for 2 hours without getting it's the mundane shit like that is really the cash value of all this stuff for me. Like I wouldn't be able to read about that stuff if it didn't give me these things that we're talking about, or if I couldn't calm my mind enough. And I've been that person in the past where I have not been able to focus, where I do still think I kind of have an ADD to an extent. I've just learned what it needs, how to wrestle it, how to like get it where I need it to be. And all of this stuff, as eclectic and maybe out there as it seems, like really feeds back into that practical shit.
Totally. Yeah, you need to ground what's like the frequencies in the sky, or else they just continue flowing on and they never connect with anything. And so that's like my goal is always to take the really big ideas and make them very precise and very applicable, because I know just from experience how wisdom actually arises. It's having the knowledge of what to do in certain situations, how to proceed, how to think. And then whenever you encounter a situation in which you need to apply that knowledge in your life, then wisdom arises. And that's how it works. And so that's why I take it, the abstract stuff, the big stuff, and really break it down to where someone can actually live it and practice it, because I know that's the only way that someone's going to truly make any advancement.
Yes, brother. I love you. Proud of, not that you need my proudness, but I'm proud of you for the things you're accomplishing.
I do, man.
Stoked for you on this new book. And that's one of the cardinal virtues right there of Platonism, prudence, knowing the wisdom of what to do in what situation. That's there's proof right there. You're just stumbling back on it through natural processes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate it. And yeah, and I would say that I do need to receive your proudness. This is like, I think I'm not sure, I have my theories as why, but like we often feel, I think, and this is just a little PSA for your listeners, is like, we often feel like we don't need to communicate those things to our friends because we feel like they're assumed or they're known, or people like, they're like, oh, that person clearly is like, doesn't need me to tell them that I'm proud of them. But it's not true. It's like, we're all people, and those things are really meaningful, no matter what. And it's like someone like me, I think in my life, because I was forced to be so hyper independent from so young. And I've just been, basically like I've spent my entire life woodshedding, and I'm tall and big and bald. People think like, oh, well, that guy doesn't need any positive reinforcement whatsoever. It's like, yes, I do. Like, it feels really nice whenever a good friend that I care about and love was like, hey, you're doing a good job. It's like, thank you. Like, my God, a good pat on the back. Like, I get one a year, please don't deprive me of it.
Right.
So I say that to say that we often look at our friends and we think that like that we don't, they know how we feel about them, or they're self-sustaining, but it's always good to, my rule is whenever you have a good thought about someone, say it. Don't just think it and think, it doesn't need to be said. It's more meaningful than people realize.
No better note to end on than that, my brother. We'll do it many more times. And thanks for coming back.
Thank you for having me.